Hey guys, I want to talk a little bit about Dahaka, and I'll probably be actually making a couple more Dahaka videos soon. I found that he's a lot better than people make him out to be, and it's been a little while since people have been playing a lot of Dahaka from what I've seen. And I want to talk about like three major builds, and kind of just explain what are the benefits of these different builds, when you should be going those versus anything else. So I'll probably do a few videos on them, probably two on this particular build, because I think this build is very strong, and I think that's a little underrated. And so the basic idea of this build is it is your Dark Swarm build, okay? You're going to be taking the talents that are Dark Swarm related. The main downside about this style of play is you normally go the movement speed with this style of play. But that's inconsistent on different maps, because if you're fighting near a bush, this is an amazing talent. But if you're not fighting near a bush, this is a dead talent, where this talent gives you spell armor and increases the duration of your Dark Swarm. The duration of your Dark Swarm is going to be directly connected to a lot of what this build does. So I start off this game doing what I do on a lot of Dahakas, where I will start bottom and I'll just jump to top using my Z, so I can soak two different lanes at once. You generally don't miss any soak doing this. I think the big downside was I wasn't expecting Zul'jin to be bottom, and I gave him a lot of free stacks for like no reason. So keep in mind that's not something that you always want to do, but it's something that I like to do just to get some more value. This map is a little weird because the first objective spawns mid and bot, or sorry, mid and top. So going top lane, which is pretty much the solo lane, you got to be a little careful about. The other thing that I like about the movement speed build is it's easier to double soak, but at the same time, you don't really need to do that, especially in the early portions of the game. So I end up just heading out, I head back up to top lane, and I go from there. So the basic idea of this build is to play in the current meta of the solo lane, but have a global. So the current meta of the solo lane is to have heroes that can be very, very scary to the backline of the enemy team. And that's really the whole purpose of this build, is to be very scary to the enemy backline and not worry so much about just jumping in and having like a little bit of value. The current meta with Yrel and Imperius and Sonya, and even Tyrael, my Tyrael build, you just go right into the backline, and the backline can't do enough damage to you fast enough. For Yrel and a lot of the other ones, the reason that the backline can't do enough damage is purely because you're too mobile to land any abilities against. However, you're going to be able to cut all ability damage in half when you're playing this build, making it to where it's a very similar way to win these fights, is you zone out an entire backline. Now, this build, we end up using a lot of like really weird talents that you don't normally see on Dehaka. I mean, you probably see them now because it's been getting a lot more popular. This is not a build that I created. This is a build that people have been slowly getting more and more into, which is great because it is a very fun build to play. But you will be seeing a lot of talent. So for example, the standard meta build that you'll normally see is Tissue Regen, which allows you to out regen most of the solo laner's damage, followed by One Who Collects, which allows you to get your Tissue Regen completed very quickly, and it allows you to get up to 60 of the Essence for the value off of Primal Rage, so you do 60% more damage on auto attacks. That was the meta build in HEC, and I still think that in the competitive scene, this would be a build that would be used a lot. However, this build right here, I think is almost equally as good in the competitive scene for a different purpose, and that's for the way that the meta works. So if you saw right there, I use the knockback to get away from the enemies, which is something that you can do on that map if you ever need to do something like that. So we end up going back into this fight, and I will say that I actually play this build out pretty wrong in the beginning, and then I play it right later in the game. So keep that in mind. I wasn't sure if I was going to go into this full play style or not, and I misclicked a couple things, but at the end of the day, this is exactly what it is, which is why I wanted to bring out another video on this later. But generally, I just wanted to bring out a couple extra videos because I just like the play style of this build. So I'll be playing it a lot. So I want to bring out one so you guys can get an idea of how the build plays. And it's also kind of an interesting video because it'll give you an idea of how the build plays if you're not that good at it. And then also I'll bring out another video so you guys can get a lot better at it. So I end up using my Z because we've already won the objectives. I use my Z to just get down to here. So let's talk a little bit about the talents that I've taken and why I've taken this. Enduring Swarm, 50 spell armor means I take half the damage from spells. and it makes it to where my Dark Swarm lasts 0.5 seconds longer. Hero Stalker. Increase the essence gain from takedowns by 100%. So to give you an idea, a takedown gives you 10 essence. Now, it will give you 20 essence. This isn't that big of a deal because if you're already getting kills, most likely you're just going to be winning the fight. You don't need this extra benefit. However, the second part is the reason why you're taking this talent. And gain 1 essence each time an enemy hero is hit by Dark Swarm. Dark Swarm hits twice a second, and it lasts 3.5 seconds, or in this case 4 seconds, because we've increased it with Enduring Swarm. So it's going to hit 8 times on a single person, meaning that you're going to get 8 essence from a single person, but most likely you're going to be hitting multiple people. Then we hit Symbiosis. Each time Dark Swarm damages an enemy hero, reduce its cooldown by 0.5 or 0.4 seconds. And once again, it's going to last 4 seconds, hitting twice a second. So it's 8 times. 8 times 4 is 3.2. So every person that you can have your W going on the entire time is going to shave off 3 seconds of the cooldown. That's a third of the cooldown. If you can hit 3 people, this has almost no cooldown. Because you got to remember that it's also counting down during the time that your W is going, which is over 4 seconds. So you actually only need to hit 2 people for full duration to have no cooldown, which makes this talent extremely powerful. Right here, I wanted to take Adaptation, but I misclicked it, and I didn't actually misclick the Isolation. I just literally clicked over here and thought I already had it. So I take a fight that I end up dying in, but it happens. It's whatever. So you take Adaptation for the same reasons that I've explained about the solo lane meta. You want to be able to dive into their backline and not be able to die. And in this case, I end up just dying because I take Adaptation a little too late. And I actually pop it, which is just crazy. So we're going to fast forward through my death. So the goal of this build is to do one major thing. It's to walk into their backline, pop Adaptation, and zone out their backline while your team kills their front line. You zone out their backline, you heal back to full, and then you go back into their front line, and the fight has already become a 5v4, a 5v3, depending on how many frontliners the enemies have. So since they have 2 frontliners, the goal of this build is to do essentially this. I dive into their backline, I zone out their backliners, maybe drag one back into my team if I really want to, or I just completely zone them out. I do a lot of damage with my W, and it's going to get even scarier as I go into the later levels. And I'll just pretty much walk right through them. And once we hit 13, the build really comes online. And what we get at level 13 is not the decreased armor as much as I really like that. It's actually this one, because your Dark Swarm is now going to slow enemies for 15%. That's going to be enough to where you can use your W and just walk through the enemy team, and you're going to be terrifying when you do that. So that's definitely something that you're going to want to take. It's an absolute necessity to take this talent because it does so much. It also deals 50% more damage while Breast Shocker's movement speed is active, which means that you can walk through a bush and you can increase the damage that you're doing by 50%. It's not a big deal. I take this for the slow because it makes it to where your whole build just works. You're unkillable. All the enemies are slowed, so that they have to take damage from your W, which is going to reduce the cooldown of it. And it's also going to make it easier to land your Q. It's just so valuable. This talent is extremely strong, and it synergizes so well with everything else. So the enemies are taking that bottom area, and I can't contest against it, so I'm pretty much just going to be annoying to this guy. I use my W, and I can also pop my trait to gain all of my life back, and then I'm just going to keep using my W on him to gain a lot of that back. So you're going to see how fast I'm getting my essence back is rather quickly. I can use my E to make sure that I don't get hit by the root, but my goal here is to pretty much just burn out this guy's mana. So I do pop my adaptation here, so whatever damage he does just gets healed back. And he's finally out of mana, so I can push if I want to, or I can defend with my team. Seeing as the enemies have left, they're probably going to roam up to me, so I'm simply going to back and abuse the fact that I have my global and I've got my abilities still. I do want to wait before we take a fight until I have adaptation back, but until then, it should be okay. So this is essentially when this build comes online. 13 is when you get the majority of the talents you need. The rest of the build's kind of irrelevant. And I'll explain more about that later, but 13 is the big power spike. And then you just kind of zone out the enemy backline. We'll see it in pretty much one fight, and then this game's just going to be over after that fight. So you've seen that we've kind of lost a lot of the fights we've been in. I end up just using Brush Stalker here once I see the Zul'jins down here, and I want to immediately join the team fight. I come out of the bush, and it allows me to have a lot of survivability. I pop my trait, and we just kill one person. Then I use the bush to get a bit more movement speed, and I'm going to head down and go fight Zul'jin. I left him because I knew that he was going to be taking a lot of damage on the objective, and I can force a 5v4. We lose a little bit on the actual objective itself, but now we can go for a kill if we want to. So Zul'jin's down here. Should be relatively easy to kill this guy. He might even pop his ult, which is fine. We're not too worried if he does do that, but otherwise, we've got it. Lucio ends up telling us to just leave, which I really should be the one sitting on the point since I have global and he doesn't. We kind of need the healer, but whatever. There's nothing else that I really need to do here, so I just clear up the lane and kind of go from there. At this level, you can take really any of the talents that you want to. Tongue range is perfectly fine. You can go with pack leader, which is also fine, but I don't really like having to rely on bushes, so I like tunneling claws, so I can zone out the enemy team, and if things really get bad, I can burrow, or I can move while burrowed, allowing me to leave a fight or allowing me to reposition into another area. So I really like tunneling claws, but you don't need to take that talent. I sit here just in case if anyone roams down from top lane, but overall, I didn't actually want to take that fight. And that's pretty much the basic idea. You're going to see how real team fights are supposed to play out with Dahaka at this point forward. And these are how I should have played out the fights in the earlier levels, but it still kind of works out. You should always be trying to use your global. Wherever the objective's spawning, you should try to go to the opposite lane and push as much as possible, unless like but also be paying attention to the map in case things go south. So right now I'm watching the enemies or my team while we're fighting over this camp. So I immediately join my team down here, and I want to save my team first. So I pop adaptation, and I can just zone out the enemies. I get hit by Mosh, but it doesn't really matter because I'm able to gain back all of that life. I pop my trait, and I use stasis to get closer. I use my W. Because I'm hitting so many people, the cooldown of my W is going to be essentially reset. So I use my W once again, get the extra movement speed and damage from the bush, and we're able to just walk through their team. So not only did I zone out 3 people and took their entire mosh pit's damage and gained it all back because of adaptation, I also was able to gain all of my life back after the adaptation with Essence Collection and went from there. I thought for a second we could try to close out the game since we have a gray main, but I don't believe we actually do end out the game here because the enemies are respawning soon, and I'm like, let's not worry about this. So I try to go for a pull to see if we can do anything with this. We can't. I use my E to get out of the fight, and we simply just walk away from this fight. And then once again, the objective is going to be bottom lane. I do have my global in the time that the objective will be available. So I end up just going for a camp because I'm like, I could use this as a distraction during the objective. And the enemies are going to be going up to the temple anyways. I have time to back to get all of my health back anyways. So I'm not really too worried about this. I just think that it's going to be a play that's going to be pretty beneficial for us. So I grab that and I'm just going to head out. I'm getting my mana back because I have my global available and I have all of my abilities available. So once again, the team fight should be pretty straightforward. If they try to fight, I Z in, I go straight for their backline, and I slow them all while also out healing the damage that they're dealing to me, and I just zone them out. You become this essential second tank for your team, except for your main tank can be more focused on engaging when they want to, while you are more like, hey, well, we're going to guarantee the fight that my team is already engaged into. And that's essentially how it plays out. And it plays out this way almost every single fight too. So once again, we're going to do the same thing. I'm waiting for my W to come up, and I'm going to use my E to stop that route, and then I'm just going to go right into their back line, popping adaptation and immediately charging in, gaining all the life back that I just took, then popping my trait, and I'm just going to kill whoever is left here. It's pretty straightforward. This build just kind of wins these team fights. As long as the team fight is running front to back like the majority of team fights run, you force the teams to pretty much guarantee that you will end up coming out ahead. And in this particular case, we can go for boss to close out the game, or we could probably just close out the game if we want to. We don't really do either or, I don't think. I end up just going top lane. My team might get a boss. I don't remember exactly what happens here. I remember I was trying to do a bug up here, so it's going to look a little weird, but I read that if you use your Z on your own hitbox, your Z won't go on cooldown, and it didn't let me use Z on my own hitbox, So it ended up just using it slightly off of the hitbox. So I'm guessing that I just did it wrong, but I kept trying to Z on my own hitbox and it just didn't let me. And then finally I Z'd like slightly off my hitbox and it went on full cooldown. And I was like, okay, whatever. But it's not really going to be that big of a bug to abuse. It just makes people walk away when you use it. But like I mashed Z on my own hitbox and it just didn't work. I was like, okay, fine. But it did make them walk away. So if this bug does exist, and if it is something that there actually is going to stay in the game, it could be something that you guys can abuse. And I'm going to mess around with it a little bit more. So I just go right into their team once again, slowing them as much as possible. I drag someone back into the team. But do you see that I'm not over-focusing on getting like a drag that's going to end the game? I'm focusing on zoning out the enemy backline rather than worrying about a drag itself. So that's something that I would definitely recommend focusing on, is instead of heavily focusing on landing a drag or a isolation, this build is very easy. You press W, you walk through their team, you slow everyone, you move yourself, or you increase your movement speed, and you just win the fight. And that's about it. And it's like, it's as simple as that sometimes. But you still want to get good at your drags because that could secure a kill that your team wasn't going to get. So use your W to slow people, and then once you started to win the fight, you can pull someone back into your team and lead to a kill. And that is Dahaka's Dark Swarm build. So I definitely recommend trying that out a little bit. I will be making a better video on it later. But I think this is a great intro guide into practicing it because it shows you someone who isn't doing very well in that build and how well they're still doing, right? And so I can show you guys a more structured version of it when I practice it a little bit more, but it's definitely a build that you guys can practice a lot more too. I think this gives a realistic look. So either way, thank you guys so much for watching and feel free to check out my other videos.